Welcome, my name is Matthew Bieber, and today I'll be speaking to you about happiness and a specific form of it that is defined by the UN in their annual happiness report. Today I will compare the countries of Denmark and the United States. Of course, the world is full of different cultures. Sometimes these cultures differ little, like with Americans and Canadians, and sometimes these differences are vast, an example being Americans and Danes. They may like the same music and TV, but the way they live their lives affect not only themselves, but also their governments and societies. A large difference in the governments lies in their taxation and wealth distribution. So basically, they have huge gaps in taxation rates between the countries, and the disposable income, you would think for Danes is going to be really low, but actually Danish people get to keep more of their income after taxes, and you can obviously see the effect of happiness on both nations. But how happy are the Danes? Of course, there's a different idea of what actually defines happiness in different nations, but Denmark is said not to only be a happier nation than the US, but the happiest in the world according to the UN Happiness Index. And the underlying difference between these peoples lies within their heritage and culture, and each group's beliefs might not exist in the other societies. And a great example of this cultural difference is a concept named hygge. I'll say that again just so you hear it, hygge. And it's something that, in my mind, explains why the Danes are so much happier than the Americans. And a quick side note before I explain hygge, this is kind of the reason that people can be taxed a lot and not care as much. So hygge has no direct translation into English. If it did, it would be a mixture of cozy, happy, and comfortable. In Denmark, there is a concept of hygge, and it is underlying theme to like everything people do. You can see in these pictures that people seem to be just having a good time together. And Emma Wagner, who's a magazine journalist, explained hygge as the calm contentment, the warmth, the sense that all is right in the world, that the truth of hygge is all of this. And this topic is nothing new to Danish people. They've kind of been known for it throughout the centuries, and this concept exists only in Scandinavia, and is a word that is shared in Norwegian and Swedish as well. And taking a look at this UN Happiness Index, Emma Wagner actually mentioned this in her magazine as well, that after the past year's Brexit vote, she kind of looked at how Denmark was very close to leaving the EU as well, but because of the happiness in the country, people didn't really want to make much of an effort to actually do anything about the government situation. And you can see here that Denmark is at number 1, topping Switzerland, and the US is number 13. But happiness is kind of something that's difficult to define. I agree with Wagner's statements about hygge, but I think that happiness is undoubtedly difficult to measure. The report has credibility, and the UN seems to be a pretty good source to get information from, but it's kind of hard to base happiness on a global scale. According to the UN, though, the happiness index is calculated by GDP per capita, social support, health, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption. Of course, it seems to be an agreed upon fact that the Danes are the happiest people in the world. And it's not to say that Americans don't have any success and they're not happy people. Americans have always found money and wealth to be very important to them, and it seems to be that the American dream is this concept where people can come to the United States, make a economic profit, and have a great time with their lives. And it's hard to say that that doesn't mean happiness, but of course there's a difference between the rankings within the UN, and it just seems to be that even though life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are the way that we kind of founded our nation, we don't seem to value things the way that the Danes do. And the reason being is that the Danes value ideals like family life, social relationships, health, and trust more than things like wealth and success, which they actually hold very low. And discussing high tax rates kind of makes this sound like socialism. Uh, the thing is, though, Denmark is not a socialist government. They are actually a free market. They're a democracy. They do have a queen, but she really is mostly just a figurehead. Um, the actual differences in the governments lie in the welfare programs, the tax rates, and they actually share a very common similarity with the free market economy with monopolistic competition. And if we take a look at the actual tax rates, the American tax rate, 39.6%, plus that flat tax, kind of are even with the first tier of Danish tax levels, 37.48%. But that only goes up to $42,000 a year of income. Once you make above that, you start paying 43.48%. And when you hit $50,000 per year, you're 59%, which is a huge amount of tax. Anyone under $6,000 per year is exempt, but obviously that's not very much, especially considering that wages in Denmark are on average much higher. And it's not really a surprise to Danes. The social aspect of equality is something that has been extremely important to the country for the last few decades. And they're very forward-thinking. There's initiatives to make the country environmentally friendly, and there's kind of just more of a forward-thinking society that backs the high taxes and such. And it was said in the Scandinavian Journal of Economics that Denmark is often portrayed as a country that has successfully combined economic performance with social safety. The way that Denmark has mastered this balance between these two concepts has shaped the way that the people think and the way that the people act economically. And I agree with Denmark's economic decisions. The high taxes seem to really work for them, but it's also the culture of the people that separates the Danes from the Americans and creates this state of social well-being. The income taxes make income pretty flat. It's pretty equal for most people, and the wealth is spread very easily. And it's kind of because the Danes hold equality in such high regard that they don't mind paying such high taxes, especially if they get to see the results of the taxes come back to them. Danes and Americans vary between the way they spend their money, the food they eat, and kind of just the way they live their lives. And this can be seen when just talking to Danish people if you're an American, but there's the added fact that the policies of each country are so vastly different, and the combination of the culture difference and the tax difference is kind of this result that Denmark is the happiest people in the world. And you see a lot of people in America praising this, especially Bernie Sanders. Obviously, he doesn't exactly understand the way that this government is set up, but the scale is completely off. Aside from that, he has this idea that we should try for equality, and he points to Denmark a lot. And of course, Denmark appreciates that, but there's also just this kind of concept that he can't wrap his head around because he's American, and the Danish culture is just too difficult to understand, and it kind of gives a roadblock to becoming just like Denmark. And it's only a matter of time before others catch on. I think a lot of people are headed towards more left-wing, socialistic sounding governments, especially like universal healthcare being something that's being brought up in the past few years. But because of the culture differences in America, I don't think they'll ever get to the point that Denmark is within their economic situation as far as welfare goes, as far as economic profit goes, and I think that it's just worked out better for the Danes, and that makes them the happiest in the world. Maybe it's good that the U.S. will never be like Denmark, and maybe it's bad. What is known is that the countries will never run the same way. There's no way. You talk to anyone in any government, they're never going to run the same way. But it's definitely shaped each country permanently and had a big effect on their people. Thank you, and continue watching to see the works cited. Have a great day.